The yard goes quiet. You notice it before you understand what it means. 1 minute, there's a northern cardinal at the feeder, a couple of dark-eyed juncos scratching under the maple, that tufted titmouse making its Phoebe call from the holly by the fence. Then nothing. The feeder is full. Nothing is moving. The yard looks exactly the same as it always does. Same trees, same feeders, same back fence. But the birds are gone. If you've ever stood at a kitchen window and watched that happen, you already know the feeling. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, since my wife and I moved out to Northern Virginia, and I still catch myself checking the sky when the yard goes like that, looking for whatever I must have missed. But the truth is simpler and a lot stranger. The yard didn't go quiet because something scared them off. The yard went quiet because they knew. They knew before the clouds changed, before the wind shifted, before the first drop hit the window. And what they did with that time, the hours between sensing the storm and surviving it, is one of the more quietly extraordinary things I've learned about the birds that live their whole lives within a few hundred feet of where you're standing right now. Welcome. Today we're going through 6 things your backyard birds do when a storm is coming, starting with how they know it's arriving before you do, and ending with something I find myself thinking about every time a serious system moves through this part of the country. Subscribe before you leave, because by the time we reach number 6, everything you thought you understood about a quiet yard on a gray morning will mean something different. Stay until the end. That's the one with weight. Number 1. They knew before you did. At 6:47 in the morning on a late November day last year, 22 hours before a named storm moved up the mid-Atlantic coast, I watched the feeder in my backyard go from normal to something I can only describe as purposeful. The dark-eyed juncos arrived first, 8 of them, which is unusual before 8 in the morning. Then the white-throated sparrows. Then the titmice and chickadees, one after another, feeding with an intensity that was different from their usual routine. Something was operating that I didn't have a name for yet. I didn't know what I was watching until I looked it up later. Birds can detect changes in atmospheric pressure so small you would need a precision instrument to register them. The mechanism involves a structure called the paratympanic organ, a pressure-sensing chamber in the middle ear that is significantly more sensitive in birds than in most other vertebrates. Research out of Cornell Lab of Ornithology on barometric sensitivity in songbirds suggests they can register pressure shifts of roughly 1 millibar. That's the equivalent of a 30-foot drop in altitude. A shift you would never consciously feel. A shift that, if you're 11 grams in winter is on the way, might be the most important piece of information available to you. Pay attention to this next part. There's a study published in Current Biology, a team tracking golden-winged warblers in the Appalachian Mountains. That documented something that made me set down my coffee when I first read it. These birds didn't just sense a storm coming. They detected it 24 to 48 hours in advance, abandoned their breeding territories entirely, flew south, sat out a major tornado outbreak in the Tennessee Valley, and came back when it passed. The detection mechanism was infrasound, frequencies below 20 hertz, generated by the storm system itself, traveling hundreds of miles through the atmosphere ahead of any visible weather signature. Your backyard birds are not migrating when a storm approaches, but the same sensitivity is there, operating every hour of every day. What I was watching at 6:47 was a survival response. The birds in your yard right now may be reading information about what's coming that your phone doesn't have access to yet. Number 2. The survival math of eating before the storm. A black-capped chickadee weighs 11 grams, 2 pennies. Research from the Journal of Avian Biology and from Cornell puts the winter caloric demand for small songbirds at roughly 30 to 40% of their body weight per day. For an 11-gram bird, that's not much food in absolute terms, but it leaves almost no buffer. There's nothing to spare. There is no such thing as a skipped day when temperatures are in the 20s. A storm creates a gap. If visibility is low and the ice is thick, and the wind is driving sleet sideways, a bird that weighs 11 grams cannot feed. A chickadee that cannot feed for 16 hours in serious winter weather is in real danger. 24 hours is a different calculation entirely. So in the hours before the storm closes the window, they eat, more than usual, with a focused purposefulness that, once you know what you're looking at, you will recognize every time a serious system approaches your area. You've probably seen this without having a name for it. The feeder that normally has steady, unremarkable traffic suddenly goes frantic, birds feeding on top of each other, coming in rotation, not leaving when another bird lands nearby the way they normally would. I used to watch the Tuesday couple, the chickadee pair I've been following for 4 winters now, that show up at the same feeder every Tuesday morning around 7 or 8, and I noticed years ago that they behave differently when a storm system is moving in. They come earlier, they stay longer, and they cache. Chickadees can hide hundreds of individual food items in a single day when conditions call for it. Seeds pressed into bark crevices, tucked into branch joints, stashed in gaps in tree bark, retrieving them later using a spatial memory system that makes human memory look like a joke. What you're watching when your feeder goes frantic is a survival calculation running in real time. How much can I store? How much can I cache? What is the minimum reserve I need to get to the other side of this? The window between sensing the storm and surviving it is measured in hours. They use everyone. Number 3, where they actually go. This is where I had to unlearn almost everything I assumed. I thought birds went somewhere vague when a serious storm hit. Into the trees, under eaves, into bushes somewhere out back. I imagined something roughly like waiting out a rainstorm under an awning. Uncomfortable maybe, but functional. The reality looks different. Not your shed, not your garage, not the birdhouse on a pole by the back fence. The shelter your backyard birds need during a serious storm is something considerably more specific than any of those. And it's something most suburban yards have been methodically clearing away for decades. Dense, layered, low vegetation, holly, spruce, arborvitae, brush piles, leaf litter and sheltered corners. The kind of structure that most of us, myself included, have historically thought of as untidy. Research on microclimate protection in bird habitat, coming out of conservation ecology programs at the University of Exeter, has measured wind speed reduction inside dense shrub clusters at up to 80% compared to the open air just a few feet away. 80%. For a bird trying to maintain its core temperature in a 30-mile-per-hour wind, that number is not a comfort improvement. That is the margin between surviving the night and not. The northern cardinal, about 45 grams, roughly the weight of a golf ball, finds its best storm cover in the densest hollies and yews it can get into, usually as close to the ground as possible. The dark-eyed junco, around 20 grams, crowds into brush piles in groups, sometimes a dozen birds in a pile you could fit in a wheelbarrow. And the Carolina wren, which weighs around 10 grams and is among the most vulnerable of the year-round backyard birds in the eastern United States, needs something almost entirely enclosed, a tight gap in a brush pile, a space in stacked firewood, anywhere the wind cannot reach directly. I have a holly bush by the back fence. Before storms, I've watched cardinals disappear into it as if they know exactly which branch is lowest and most protected. And they probably do, because they've been using that bush for 3 winters. The oak with the old woodpecker cavity in the trunk. Chickadees and white-breasted nuthatches use that during storms. They have been using it for years. Not every yard has those things, and I'll come back to why that matters. But first, number 4. What their bodies are doing while the storm is at its worst. At 2:37 in the morning, when the wind chill outside my kitchen door is 9 degrees and the sleet is coming sideways, the black-capped chickadees tucked into the oak cavity in my backyard are doing something their bodies have been doing for millions of years. They are getting cold, deliberately, on purpose. Regulated hypothermia, deliberate overnight torpor in small songbirds, is one of the more extraordinary physiological tools available to the birds you watch at your feeder every morning. The research on this, detailed work from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, and confirmed across multiple songbird species in studies published in Animal Behavior, tells us that a chickadee can lower its core body temperature by up to 22 degrees Fahrenheit during severe overnight conditions. A chickadee's normal body temperature runs around 106 degrees Fahrenheit. On a bad night, it can bring that down to 84 or 85 degrees, not because it's in danger, because that is the strategy. What this saves in energy terms is roughly 40% of overnight caloric expenditure. For an 11-gram bird with limited fat reserves in a storm outside that shows no sign of stopping, that 40% may be the exact margin between making it to your feeder in the morning and not. I want you to sit with this. Research on communal roosting in small songbirds, work out of Ohio State, consistent with studies in animal behavior, has documented something I've only ever seen evidence of indirectly. Titmice, nuthatches, and chickadees sometimes sharing a single cavity on the worst nights. Different species, different feeders, different behavioral territories. In a tight space in the dark, in a storm, sharing body heat. The technical term for this is heterospecific communal roosting. I don't have better words than the technical ones for what I think about when I see three birds pour out of the same cavity hole at first light after a bad night. I just know I stand at the window a little longer than I need to. Number 5. I want to be honest with you about something. This is the item where I have to tell you what I was doing wrong for the first 2 years I had this yard. And I think a lot of you may be doing the same thing, not because you're not paying attention, but because the way most of us were taught to manage an outdoor space actively works against birds during the hours they most need it to work for them. I used to rake the entire backyard every fall, every leaf, every fallen branch, every corner cleared out. The beds were clean, the lawn was neat. It looked like a well-maintained suburban yard. It also had almost no storm shelter. Research on songbird storm mortality in the mid-Atlantic and southeastern states, particularly for year-round residents like the Carolina wren, a bird that cannot migrate ahead of a fast-moving winter event, suggests that a single severe ice storm can reduce local wren populations by up to 50%. That number is not a data fluctuation. That is a crash. And the primary limiting factor, according to the conservation biology literature, is not cold tolerance. It is the absence of adequate shelter within reach of feeding areas. A Carolina wren weighing 10 grams, caught in an ice storm with nowhere to go, has hours, probably fewer. I stopped clearing the back corner of my yard about 3 winters ago. A brush pile built up over 2 seasons, branches, leaf debris, things I stopped raking away. Nothing organized, nothing landscaped. The winter after that pile was established, the bird counts I noted in the days following ice storms looked different from what I'd tracked in previous years. I can't give you a controlled study. I have no data beyond sustained attention. But the wrens were at the feeder the morning after, more consistently than I'd seen before. I'm not telling you to let your yard go. I'm telling you that one corner, one brush pile, one dense unpruned shrub left close to the ground is not clutter. It is infrastructure. It might be exactly the difference between the Carolina wren that has been in your yard all fall showing up the morning after the next storm, and not showing up. I wish someone had passed that on to me in year 1. I'm passing it on now. Number 6. I've saved this one for last. Not because it's the most scientifically complex, because it's the one that has the most weight for me personally, and I think you might recognize what I'm describing. The storm passes, the wind drops, the sky goes that particular gray-white color that means it's mostly over. And you go to the kitchen window. This is the part nobody really prepares you for. Last January, a system moved through northern Virginia. Ice overnight, then 4 inches of snow, wind gusts that knocked my heated bird bath off its base and cracked it. I was up before the light was fully there, coffee in hand, standing at the kitchen window. The feeder was still. The holly was bent almost to the ground under the weight of the ice. Nothing was moving. I wasn't frightened exactly, but I was watching that yard the way you watch a hospital door. The Tuesday couple. The chickadees I've been watching for 4 winters now, that show up at the same feeder on Tuesday mornings, that I've watched long enough to recognize individually by their timing and their particular way of approaching the feeder, had been out in all of that, all night. And I was standing at the window not entirely sure they'd made it through. There is a harder truth you have to hold alongside this. Not all of them do. The research on small songbird winter mortality is clear about this, and I think you deserve to hear it plainly. A single severe winter storm event can reduce a local songbird population by 10 to 20%. Some of the birds at your feeder today will not be at your feeder next spring. The yard will have gaps where familiar patterns used to be. I'm not saying this to leave you somewhere dark. I'm saying it because the birds that do come back chose your yard. They survived whatever the night was, and they came back to you specifically. The Tuesday couple came back. 40 minutes after I stood at the window, the female appeared at the feeder, moving quickly, eating quickly, the way birds move when they've been waiting for something to be safe again. The male followed 2 minutes later. It wasn't a reunion in any human sense. It wasn't recognition or gratitude, not on their end anyway. It was just 2 birds, alive, in a frozen yard, doing exactly what they always do. I don't have a clean word for what I felt watching that. Something about the specific size of a small bird surviving something large in a yard that had what it needed to shelter them. I keep coming back to that, to what it means to be the yard they came back to. If there's a storm in your forecast tonight, go look at your yard before it gets dark. Think about what's there. Think about what might not be there yet. And tomorrow morning, get up early and go to the window. The yard goes quiet before a storm because something is happening that you cannot see and could not hear even if you tried. A pressure shift, a frequency below the floor of human perception, a signal moving through the air ahead of weather that hasn't arrived yet. And the birds in your yard are reading it, and they are getting ready, and most of them make it through to the morning. What I've come to understand, after 5 winters of paying real attention to what happens in a small suburban yard in Northern Virginia, is that the quiet before a storm isn't absence. It's the opposite of absence. It's your yard doing exactly what it was always doing, just the part you don't get to see. Tell me in the comments, have you ever stood at a window after a serious storm, waiting for a specific bird to show up, and felt that knot in your chest when they finally did? Was there a specific one you were watching for? I want to hear about it. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.